and welcome to the Droid and Dragon Cantina, a podcast highlighting independent science fiction and fantasy authors. Our guest this week is L.R. Maley, who is the author of the Chronicles of The Manaar. In this episode, we talked about the world of indie publishing and the finer points of writing fantasy books. All right, so welcome to the show, Mr. L.R. Maley.
Call me Larry.
So tell everybody about the series of books you got out right now.
Well, it's my first series. It's called The Chronicles of The Manaar. It's an epic fantasy. I've got 3 books, and it's pretty much concluded in 3 books. But there is kind of a little gap that I've left. I can go back and do some fill-in novelettes later. But you know, it's an all-in-one from beginning to end. It's a story. It's basically set in a medieval world. But it's a story about 6 friends that get caught up in a war. They're at their annual harvest festival, enjoying life together when their country is attacked, and they find themselves kind of running at the forefront of war. And as they go, it's a long lead in to learn about their world. But as you go, they are learning things about their world as well. And one of them is that their world used to have magic, okay? And now it's back. It's back with the advent of this war. And as they are escaping, they start to learn that they have some control over magic as well. And that's the underlying theme through the whole series is as they're learning, they're finding out why there was no magic, why there's magic now. And ultimately, their goal is to rid the world of magic because of the evil and corruptness that it brings.
Mm. So what inspired you to write these novels?
You know, it's hard to say. This one had been brewing in my mind for a while. I guess the biggest part of this particular series was the magic system. Okay, I'm a geek from way back, and Dungeons and Dragons was my childhood. But there's one aspect that maybe not necessarily related to the Dungeons and Dragons. That I learned in elementary school that really bothered me, and that was sacrifice, and especially Aztec sacrifice. And it was something that always, I think it scared me. I had nightmares about it as a kid, but I couldn't put my mind around somebody doing something so evil to another person. What were they gaining, And that's the kind of the crux of the magic system in this world. Is gaining magical power through sacrifice.
Mm. So it sounds like you had the storytelling bug from an early age if you're playing D&D.
Oh yeah. Well, that's another thing that I learned. I learned that writing is just like being a dungeon master.
Yeah.
I don't know. Were you a D&D geek?
Actually, you know what? I wasn't, but it's funny because I guess I didn't know anyone who was into it around where I was. I was in a small southern town. I guess more people were playing, football and baseball. And, back when I was growing up, it wasn't cool to be a geek. So if you're over a certain age, you can remember those days where that kind of stuff just made your life harder when people found out about it. But it's definitely something I look at. It's like, the more I've learned about it, like in adulthood, ironically, like I've learned like the storytelling aspect of it. I think I would have really enjoyed.
That's what I gravitated to. There are basically 2 kinds of role players: the kind that are all focused on the numbers and the dice and the rules, and then other people like myself that the rules were more of a structure to tell the story.
So were you trying to do any writing outside of that at the time, or was that something that came later?
No, I just as I was doing, well, again, another kind of evolution of becoming an author was I started looking at how-to books, and I looked at one by a favorite author of mine called Rachel Aaron. And it was basically not one of her fantasy books, but it was basically a how-to, and it was how to get from 2K to 10K a day. Okay. and when I read this book, she basically went through what I did as a dungeon master, planning, writing and stuff. So that's when the light bulb went on that, hey, this is no different than being a dungeon master. So then I kind of changed to planning the whole thing from beginning to end, just like I would if I was doing a story in a game.
So it sounds like you definitely kind of lean, or at least for these books, you kind of lean more into the plotter approach rather than the pantser approach.
Right.
So how much of that world are you fleshing out before you even get started, or are you doing, like, say, maybe, like 60% of it before you start, and then you do the rest of it as you're going along?
I knew what I had to. Okay, I set my beginning and my end, and the key points in the middle, and then I just work towards those points. Okay. An interesting aspect about that part of writing for me was I started off as an outline writer. I had everything outlined from the beginning to the end, okay? And I was following it very rigidly, okay? And one day, it was probably around chapter 8 or 9, I had it all in my outline. It was plain and simple. They, Mick and Reed lead the group to Falwyn. The battle's already starting. There's a big old battle taking place, but they're being shepherded away for safety into a caravan to go away. End of chapter. They're on a caravan. They didn't know what happened on the battle. I was actually afraid to write the battle. That was probably why I outlined it that way. I didn't think I was ready to write a battle. But somewhere in my writing, Mick said, we can help them. And Reed said, okay, let's go. And I'm like 4 pages later, and I realize I'm not following my outline anymore. They were I swear to God, it was like watching a movie. They were doing this on their own, going out there, helping and and affecting the battle. And, so first thing I do when I realized that, as I stopped, I started deleting stuff. And then I thought, wait a second, that ain't right. Just let this flow and see what happens. And at that moment, I changed from outline to just one line scene bullets. And then I let it go from there. So I knew what the world was, but I wanted I wanted them to discover it on their own. And that worked much better for me.
Yeah, sometimes some of the best writing, you when you start to feel like you're kind of watching it happen, and you're more like a reporter who's just writing it down versus,
I think that's exactly, yeah.
Yeah. So, like, what were some of your other influences, I guess, is, when you were, kind of developing your style? Like, who are some of the other writers, or even if it's just like stuff that's outside of books, like movies or other games?
I'm going to be Captain Obvious here. Tolkien was I must have listened to the Lord of the Rings on audio. I've read them at least 5 times before I got into audio, and I've probably listened to them at least 20 times all the way through. Okay, in the last 30 years. So yeah, Tolkien is a huge. If somebody reads my book, I'm sure they will see the Tolkien influence in it, because I looked at it like, this is the grandfather of fantasy. It's a genre, and I wanted to fit within that genre. I didn't reinvent it. Okay. That being said, I'm also not a linguist. I couldn't make languages. That would have took forever, and I didn't want to take forever to write it. So, in the events where I have culture and stuff that I want to do, I borrowed from culture that is in medieval Earth, our world. So, for instance, again, the original perpetrators of the sacrifice that produced magic, I went strongly on names from Aztec and Inca lore, and my characters, my main protagonists in the country that they're from, Arasa, is strongly influenced by medieval England, and in fact, my reader on my audiobooks is a Brit, and he just did such a good job, because he distinguished all my cultures by different accents, and it's really a pleasure to listen to him flesh out my book.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, I feel like it's Tolkien is definitely one of those like the certain. I think like when it comes to like sci-fi or fantasy, I feel like the three authors you always run into are Tolkien, Frank Herbert through Dune, and Isaac Asimov. And a lot of that is too because a lot of people come in either Lord of the Rings, which obviously going back to Tolkien, but Frank Herbert and Asimov, influenced Star Wars. And and even Tolkien is in that. You can even see elements of Tolkien in Star Wars too, because it's like the gateway drug that gets a lot of people into all that. So it's there's certain authors like who I feel like you just can't escape.
And you can't write without being influenced by what you've read. I challenge anybody to do that.
Yeah, well, who are some of the others besides Tolkien, or what are the other some of the influences?
Again, I love Roland. I love the Harry Potter series. Contemporary writers, Drew Hayes. Are you familiar with Drew Hayes?
I can't say that I am.
He's really good. Scott Meyer did Magic 2.0. These guys are really good. I think all these fellows have started off as indie writers and they're now published, but Drew Hayes especially I recommend Superpowered. It's really it's an epic and a really super world building. I can't say enough about his writing that I enjoyed those books so much.
So did you set out to do the indie thing right up front, or did you maybe try to submit the books around first to see if they would get picked up?
I tried writing a book in the 90s and go through traditional means, and it was very disappointing. I did the old send out so many copies to all the different, because we didn't have the internet back then, emails and stuff. So I did the old way, and it really sucked the life out of me. So I didn't try writing again for another 20 years. So yeah, I went straight to indie because I knew that cracking that nut is like hitting the lotto. There's perhaps hundreds of thousands of writers out there that are super talented, but unless you have some stroke of luck, like hitting the lotto, you're not going to get the big ones to look at you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this podcast, because just like in the last, I don't know, maybe 10 years or so, maybe even more. But I mean, it felt like it went from a time where being self-published, there was kind of a stigma to it, to where now it's not only accepted, it's like a lot of people just go there right away.
There's good and bad, but there's it's a good place to start anyway. That's my hope. Now I've got this all ready to go, or it's all published, it's out there, waiting for sales and all that, and I'm going to start doing promotion and signings and such, this sort of thing with you. But my next books are going to both be sci-fis, and I've already got them started. So that's I think with those, since I've learned the indie route, I think I'm going to let this be my flagship. I can use it to showcase to publishers and stuff that I'm not just fly by night, whatever. And then with my new writing, don't go the indie route with it. Hold it back. Because that's the other thing I learned is once you've gone indie, they don't want to look at it. So
well, I'm also hearing stories about people now will like some of the bigger publishers will they'll keep their eye on this stuff, and if someone starts getting to like a certain level, they'll jump in and snatch them up.
I'm sure that's what happened to with Drew Hayes. Because like all of a sudden, everything new he was producing was all going through the one of the big publishers. I think it might have been Del Rey. Same with Scott Meyer. His stuff that's coming out now is really going that route.
So you already have got sounds like you've already got some new stuff in the works, like that you're planning on.
I'm doing space opera, so I've got that started, and I'm satisfied with that. And then I'm going to do a monster one, but this I'm going to do in shorter inserts, not as an epic, just like series, modular type things. But again, and I don't want to get bogged down on just these two things. After I get the series started, I know where I'm going to go with it, then I'm going to try to diversify into some other genres as well. I want to write a memoir, kind of like a Christmas story type thing about my childhood, because there's a lot of funny stories there to extract. So
Well, it sounded like, I know what you just said, that you had written something in the 90s, and I guess that the process kind of put you off of it. What was it that got you to pick it back up?
My again, audiobooks. My brother and I were sharing a lot of our audiobooks, and we made a list of everything we had, and we would get into conversations with each other and critique this stuff. And one day I was sitting there and watching TV, and I was thinking about how we're critiquing this stuff, and some of the negative stuff we were saying about some of the books. And I thought, you know what, if I'm going to, and again, I'm not like, I didn't go public with it or anything like that, but I'm thinking, if I can be so critical of other people, why don't I see if I can put my money where my mouth is? So that's how the first 6 chapters of Immersion came into being. And I didn't want to go any further. I sent it to my brother, and I asked him, I says, okay, just tell me if this piques your interest enough for me to go on, I'll go on. But if it's crap, tell me, just be honest. And after he read it, he sent me back. I feel like Christopher Tolkien waiting for JR stuff in North Africa. He says, I need the next chapter. So again, that spurred me to finish it. I totally respect my brother's opinion. So
yeah, well, that's cool. So like, did you kind of like, it sounded like you were talking about having done the kind of the beginning, the points in the middle and the end. So like, it just sounded like, did you originally envision it as a trilogy, or did the trilogy kind of come out of just more and more ideas?
I'd say more and more ideas. I would have thought, I think originally it was going to, would have been like a thick book, maybe 400 or 500 pages. But as I went on, I found I had to do it in segments, because I didn't want to just dump the whole world and the history on a reader at once. Because again, I won't say the author's name, but it was a series I was loving. Okay. And he was very slowly introducing, like just like I'm saying, slowly introducing what was going on. But when he got to book 2, it was like all data dumping, all lore and legends and blah, 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 blah. And for at least half a book, the characters were lost. It was all, and if he would have just set those notes aside and have the characters learn that through the actions, it would have kept my interest, but I had to put it down. Okay. So I didn't want to do that. And that kind of led me to set the epic pace, and, I'm probably paced similar to Tolkien, they're learning about ancient history, as they're going along through songs and such. I guess that's it. It was a pacing thing that drove the length.
Well, that's always part of the challenge, I guess, when you're doing sci-fi or fantasy. It's like you got to build out the world, but you got to do it in such a way that you don't lose the reader. You like you're talking about doing the data dump. Not everybody can do that.
It's hard. It's like you say. You want to see the character's perspective on it and how history affects them. And I think that's even one of the things that Tolkien said in his prologue. He was more interested in history and how it affected the present.
So are you trying to do like the maps and all that stuff? And
yeah,
you already actually the language, but yeah.
Yeah, I hand drew all my maps. And again, there's another aspect to that. I made sure I read up on plate tectonics and, how things actually work in geography, because I've read books where the person does, again, I don't want to get into naysaying other books, but you get to a point where all of a sudden they say something like, for instance, the bridge thing, or the ferry thing. Okay. I had to look up how medieval ferries worked, because I read books where they have a ferry and it's like, no, they didn't have that technology back then, or they didn't do it that way. And it was obvious. And it bothers me when an author doesn't do a little bit of research about what he's describing.
Well, it's interesting too. Like, it's because if you do introduce, like, say you want to give this, okay, this particular society is a little more advanced, but if you give them that one thing, what else does that one thing kind of, how does that affect everything else?
Have you ever read a book where, like, it's a fantasy in a medieval setting, and all of a sudden this person's talking about the aorta and the central nervous system and stuff, and they're describing it, and I'm thinking, this guy knows this stuff because he lives in the modern world, but he did not think for 1 second that in the Middle Ages the blacksmith wouldn't be talking about the circulatory system and how oxygen gets in the lungs.
Right. Like, how do you just know about, like, how all the years and years of experimentation and, even getting people to where it is acceptable to coat open bodies and, like, look at all that stuff and not get called like a witch or, say that you were like,
if you would have said something like he threw a lich on it and he was healed, I would have accepted it.
Right. You'd have been better. You'd have been more if you had done less.
Right. Yeah.
I know some people who can get into, like, fantasy, but not necessarily sci-fi. Because I always say, like, sci-fi, even though I think there's some inevitable overlap of the two, especially in sci-fi, because at some point there's elements of fantasy, just because if you're trying to project stuff you don't know or stuff that's so far beyond your realm of experience, there's going to be a little fantasy elements in there. So
anything can be handled with a little bit of research. It doesn't take much with the internet, I mean, because there are so many book helping websites and people that will basically explain it to you, So if it's a lazy writer, will end up with a few faux pas in their writing if they're not careful.
I mean, I feel like you can always tell, like, who the ones are that kind of did their homework and the ones who didn't.
I hope I come across as a homework guy.
Yeah, sometimes it pays to be a nerd,
Yeah,
or at least be nerdy enough, So, as we're coming up on the half-hour mark, tell people where they can find you online if they want to learn more about your stuff or at you.
LRMaleynovels.com. Okay, my son maintains it for me. It's got all the information there that my Amazon link, because I've got. I'm in Kindle. I'm on the Apple. You can order print books through Amazon, and I am on Audible. Again, like I mentioned earlier, I can't say enough about the reader I had. What a great job he did. And I haven't had anybody that has listened to him say anything negative about him. He really is a fantastic talent. His name is David Pickering. So you can find me on Audible, Amazon, simple search L.R.Maley will find me. Again, my first 3 books are the Chronicles of the Manaar. Immersion is the first book. Redemption is the second book, and Ascension is the third book.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming out, man, and we'll be on the lookout for your stuff.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
That will be all for this episode. This podcast has been a Carcutta Media production. To learn more about this show or other podcasts, visit carcuttamedia.com/podcasts or follow us on social media at Carcutta Media. This recording or any portion thereof may not be reproduced or used in any manner whatsoever without the express written permission of the publisher, except for use of brief quotations in a review. Copyright 2025 by Carcutta Media. All rights reserved.